there, and welcome one and all to the True Crime Grapple podcast. I am your host Dan, and this is episode 19. So last week's show took us to England for a stalking case, but this week we're headed to the Lone Star State of Texas for a murder case. That's right, murder is back on the agenda. But it isn't just a straightforward murder case, so stay tuned. By the way, follow our social media. Our Facebook and Instagram is at True Crime Grapple, and our Twitter is at TCG3682. And if you look that up, why not consider becoming a patron? If you were last week, then you would have had the benefit of getting the Maria Marchese episode 5 days earlier. And also up there is the Marchese bonus episode, where for 30 minutes I review the case, giving my thoughts on it. So check it out over at patreon.com/True Crime Grapple and sign up for that murder tier for $5 a month. Okay, strap yourself in because that's the housekeeping done. The show today is written by Jim Pitts, it's narrated by Dan Kelton, and the music is by Baba Beats. It's time for your fix, so lock the door, sit back and relax because it's true crime time. No one wins tonight. It's true crime time. It's episode 19. Throughout history, the date April 19th has been of great importance in world events. On April 19, 1529, 6 princes and 14 imperial free cities of the Holy Roman Empire began their protest of the imperial ban of Martin Luther and his followers, thus beginning the Protestant Reformation. Exactly 10 years later, on April 19, 1539, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, signed the Treaty of Frankfurt, a formal agreement of peace with the Protestants. In 1770, James Cook became the first European to see the eastern coastline of Australia. On April 19, 1775, British troops and American colonists clash at Lexington and Concord to begin the American Revolution, sparking an eventual worldwide movement of independence of colonies. In crime history, April 19 repeatedly shows up there also. Elliot Ness, the FBI Prohibition-era agent who led the Untouchables and arrested Al Capone, was born on April 19, 1903. In 1927, Mae West was sentenced to 10 days for obscenity for her Broadway play, Sex. Cult leader Charles Manson was given the death sentence in 1971. In 1985, 200 ATF and FBI agents lay siege to a white supremacist group, the CSA, in Arkansas. In a case that has returned to the public consciousness recently, jogger Trisha Melly is attacked in Central Park, New York City on April 19, 1989. 5 minority juvenile boys were arrested and convicted for the crime, but were exonerated years later. Their story was recently made into a Netflix limited series called When They See Us. In 1993, the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, Texas went up in flames, killing 76 members, including their leader, David Koresh, to end a 51-day standoff with the FBI. 18 children under the age of 10 died in the fire. In 1995, on the 2-year anniversary of the Branch Davidian fire, Timothy McVeigh detonates a truck bomb in front of the Muir Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people, including 19 kids less than 6 years old. For 2 families in 2 towns, the April 19th of 1994 has a much more heartbreaking significance. For this tragic event, The fallout still reverberates today, more than a quarter of a century later. The Texas city of Tyler has been mentioned here before. It was tangentially associated with the KFC murders more than 10 years earlier. In 1994, Tyler was a thriving small city of more than 75,000, located about 100 miles east of Dallas, Texas, on Interstate 20. Tyler, the county seat of Smith County, proudly proclaims itself as the rose capital of the world. It is the home of the largest rose garden in the United States, with 38,000 rose bushes of at least 500 different varieties. American football legend Earl Campbell grew up in Tyler, hence the nickname, the Tyler Rose. It is the hometown of current NFL star Patrick Mahomes. In 1994, Grapeland was about 2 square miles big with a population of less than 1,500, give or take a couple of souls on any given day. It was 63% white and 35% black, with 1 out of every 4 residents living below the poverty line. The big celebration every year is the Peanut Festival, held in the fall in conjunction with a game by the only high school in town's football team, the Grapeland High Sandies. Grapeland was the type of town that if you blink when passing through, you might just miss it. John Luttig was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania during the Great Depression in the early 1930s. After serving in the Korean War in the early 1950s, he took a job with Atlantic Richfield as a petroleum engineer, eventually settling in Tyler. It was there that he would meet Bobby Sue Lowry, and the couple would marry in 1953. Soon, the young couple was joined by a son, Michael, born in 1954, and then a daughter, Suzanne, born in 1961. Luttig would eventually start his own company and became very active in Tyler in both the church and civic scenes. Their son Michael would eventually graduate from the University of Virginia School of Law in 1981, before joining the then President of the United States Ronald Reagan's staff, vetting potential judicial opponents. Over the next 2 years, Michael continued his ascent up the judicial ranks, clerking for eventual Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Warren Burger. After entering private practice, Michael joined the United States Department of Justice under President George H.W. Bush, where he assisted Supreme Court nominees David Souter and Clarence Thomas with their Senate confirmation hearings. In 1991, President Bush nominated Michael to a seat in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, becoming, at the age of 37, the youngest judge on the Federal Appeals Court. From his beginnings in Tyler, Texas, Michael Luttig was a rising star in the federal judiciary on April 19, 1994. Napolean Beazley was born on August 5, 1976 to Ireland and Rena Beazley, the second of 3 children, and was named after his parental grandfather Napoleon Louis Beazley. Ireland Beazley worked at the local steel mill, eventually becoming a line supervisor, and Rena became the first black teller at Grapeland State Bank. Breaking racial barriers was not uncommon for the Beazleys. Ireland would become Grapeland's first black city councilman. In high school, after the integration of Grapeland schools in 1968, more than 14 years after the landmark Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education, Rena would become Grapeland High School's first black cheerleader. Their daughter and Napoleon's older sister, Maria, would graduate from Grapeland with honours and attend Rice University in Houston, one of the top-ranked and most prestigious universities in the United States. Napoleon had his entire life before him. He was about 6 weeks from graduating high school as an honour student, a star athlete in 4 sports, a debate team standout, the senior class president, runner-up for the title of Mr. Grapeland High School, was about to enter the United States Marine Corps, and hoped to attend Stanford Law School and one day become a lawyer. 17-year-old Napoleon was a rising star in his own right on April 19, 1994. But if you look beneath the surface, sometimes you see things disturbingly different, even sinister. Even at the end of the 20th century, almost 30 years since the end of segregation in the South, both Tyler and Grapeland were still highly divided along racial and socio-economic lines, both geographically and culturally. Like many cities in the Deep South, Tyler's neighbourhoods were divided by racial lines. In 1929, city planners wanted it that way, developing city parks named after black leaders far away from white neighbourhoods. In 1959, Tyler opened a new all-white high school named after Confederate General Robert E. Lee, 5 years after the US Supreme Court desegregated schools. 11 years later, US District Judge Wayne Justice ordered a complete and immediate desegregation of Tyler schools, an order that would stand until 2016, when Tyler schools were declared fully desegregated. In February 1994, only 2 months before the incident on April 19th, hundreds of students at Lee High School staged a 2-day walkout over the suspension of a student due to his Confederate t-shirt. Grapeland was much smaller than Tyler, but had a similar racial history with segregation. The town is divided into 2 parts, north and south, by Chestnut Street. The north part had nicer streets, nicer yards and nicer houses. The south part became known as the Quarters, the black side of town. Napoleon Beazley was raised in the Quarters, but not in the average black family for the neighbourhood. Growing up in the poorest part of the Quarters, Ireland and Rena were determined to give their children a comfortable lifestyle. By the time Beazley entered high school, with Ireland as a city councilman, the Beazleys were considered the Quarter's most prominent citizens. Beazley was known as a respectful young man who always showed his good manners. He never missed school, often sitting in the front row of the classroom, eager to learn. While at school, Beazley had a close-knit group of friends that he hung around with, but all of them were white. It was understood that at night, on weekends or during the summer, you stayed to your side of town. Beazley seemed to be the exception to the rule. The parents of his white friends accepted and welcomed him into their homes. Many considered him to be like a son to them. But the spectre of racism were always there. Once, as a 7-year-old, Beazley wasn't allowed to a friend's birthday party. The boy's father told Ireland that, quote, "You all aren't welcome here." Surprisingly, it wasn't only racism by white residents that Beazley endured. Napoleon broke the rules. He crossed the line, literally Chestnut Street, and it wasn't always so black and white. For that, he paid a price. In a letter to Pamela Koloff, a writer for the Texas Monthly, Beazley wrote, quote, "I felt more racism from blacks than I could ever experience from whites. Because some of my friends were white, I was ridiculed. Because I dated white girls, I was ridiculed. Not by white people, black people. He was truly trapped between two worlds. Beazley's black classmates called him White Boy because he didn't act or talk a certain way. He was light-skinned. He was different. Something his white friends couldn't comprehend. Increasingly, Beazley wanted to be accepted by his black peers. Continuing in the letter to Koloff, Beazley wrote, quote, "I wanted to be accepted, so I did what I thought was necessary to fit in. I was, quite frankly, a chameleon, an actor. I played roles and changed colours to fit the scene in the script. Most of all, I wanted to be black." Ironically, the only time Beazley saw colour was when he was told he wasn't black enough. Enter Beazley's cousin Timmy, who was 5 years older. After graduating Grapeland High School, Timmy moved to Houston with nothing going for himself. No job, no money, no education past high school. Timmy would return home driving a Cadillac, wearing gold chains and diamond rings. For a 13-year-old Beazley, it made quite an impression. Quote, "When my cousin came home, he was accepted, admired, respected. No one questioned his blackness," Beazley wrote. Even though Beazley's mother didn't allow Timmy in the house anymore, he still helped Beazley begin dealing crack in the quarters. As a multi-sport athlete, it wasn't uncommon for people to see Beazley working out or running to stay in shape. What people didn't know was that when he ran at night, it was always with $20 rocks of crack in his pocket. Money was not the object of his dealing. He just wanted the image of a drug dealer. For the first time, he felt, quote, accepted by the blacks everyone considered hip. The more he wanted to feel black, the further he moved away from straddling the two worlds on either side of Chestnut Street and more into the dark side of the quarters. Beazley would start hanging out with another, more experienced crack dealer named Cedric Coleman. Cedric was 3 years older than Beazley, but only one grade ahead. He was the star of the best Grapeland Sandys football team since the state champions of 1974. In 1992, as a senior, Cedric was named one of the top running backs in Texas. Beazley, now a junior, was his backup and idolised Cedric, both as an athlete and as a drug dealer. Over the next year, Beazley became more immersed in Cedric's world, along with Cedric's quick-tempered little brother, Donald, otherwise known as Fig. It was a world of drugs, guns, money, and police. It was bad enough that Ireland and Rena were concerned about their middle child, as a family friend had told them that Beazley was involved in drugs. Thinking he was using, the parents had Beazley tested twice for drug use. Both tests came back negative. Most top footballers in Texas go on to play at major universities all over the States, but not Cedric Coleman. His grades were too bad to qualify. Instead, he had to go to a 2-year school and get his grades up. So, in the summer of 1993, Cedric moved off to play football at Navarro College in Corsicana, Texas. Ireland and Rena were hoping that with Cedric gone, Beazley can get back on track as the star of the football team. But Beazley had another secret. A girl he had dated for a short time told him she was pregnant with his child. His entire life had changed in one conversation. Everything changed for Beazley. He knew he would have to support the child. Since he was a child, he had dreamed of playing college football, Now, barely 17, he knew he had to be a man. Against his parents' wishes, Beazley joined the Marines, with his induction scheduled after graduation in May 1994. Beazley assured his parents that after his enlistment, he would use the GI Bill and go to college and then on to Stanford Law School. Beazley's world turned upside down again in March 1994. The baby was born, but Beazley learned he was not the father. By this time, after an injury derailed his football plan, Cedric was back in Grapeland hanging out with Beazley. The pair would grow closer, tied by failed dreams, video games and drug dealing. Beazley even obtained a .45 caliber Haskell semi-automatic pistol and kept it tucked into his jeans. He also had a sawed-off shotgun, which was hidden but easily accessible in his mum's car. Hey friends of the show, sorry for a pause in the story, but just a quick reminder to let you know how you can help support the show by becoming a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/truecrimegrapple, and for $1 US a month you can get a shout out on the show with the assault tier. For $5 a month there is the murder tier, where we'll have early episodes up every so often and we'll have some bonus content coming your way. So check it out. That's patreon.com/truecrimegrapple. Any donation is greatly appreciated and welcomed. Once again, patreon.com/truecrimegrapple. Many thanks. One afternoon in April 1994, Cedric told Beazley the story of a drug dealer in nearby Palestine who carjacked a Mercedes. And with that story, the events were set in motion for Beazley to cross paths with the Luttigs on April 19, 1994. As a gift the Christmas before, John Luttig gave his wife, Bobby, a special gift. He had enrolled her in a night class at Southern Methodist University in Dallas to work on her Master of Divinity degree. On April 19th, John drove Bobby to her 6 p.m. class in Dallas and waited for the class to be over. The couple then got into their Mercedes-Benz and began the 2-hour drive home back to Tyler. Earlier that day, Beazley had told a classmate at school that he, quote, might be driving a Benz soon. The previous night, April 18th, Beazley and Cedric Coleman had taken Rena's red Ford Probe to go to Corsicana to meet some girls at Navarro College. On the way, Beazley told Cedric that he wanted to jack a car that night. After not seeing a suitable one in the college parking lot, Beazley wanted to make a 1-hour drive north on Interstate 45 to Dallas. His plan was to steal a car and take it to a chop shop in Dallas. Cedric talked Beazley out of the plan and convinced him to wait until another day. The next night, April 19th, 1994, the pair, this time joined by Fig, made the trip to Corsicana and then east on State Highway 31 to Tyler. The trio spotted a Lexus in the town of Athens, and Cedric began to follow it towards Tyler, eventually losing sight of it. In Tyler, they decided to grab a bite to eat at a local restaurant. As they pulled into the parking lot, they noticed a driver of a Mercedes getting out of his car. Beazley jumped out of the car with his loaded .45, but the driver disappeared into the restaurant without even noticing Beazley. Yelling at Beazley to return to the car, Cedric left the restaurant without even getting his food and began the hour-long journey back to Grapeland. Angered by failing twice that night, Beazley ordered Cedric to turn around and go back into Tyler, threatening to shoot him if he refused. Cedric pulled over and told Beazley to go and do his own driving. Beazley took the wheel and headed back towards Tyler on State Highway 155. Cedric asked Beazley why he wanted to steal a car, and Beazley explained that he wanted to see what it was like to kill someone. It was at this point, about 11 PM on that Tuesday night, April 19, 1994, that the trio crossed paths with the Luttigs, driving home from a class at SMU in the cream-coloured 1987 Mercedes-Benz. Following the Luttigs on State Highway 155, Napolean Beazley's two worlds were about to explode in one horrific event in John Luttig's garage that night. But the story won't end in Luttig's garage that night. It only begins its controversial second act. Driving that late at night, the Luttigs sensed they were being followed. As they pulled up their driveway and into their garage, the red Ford Probe parked on the street. Beazley jumped out of the car, pistol in hand. Donald Fig Coleman followed behind him with the sawed-off shotgun, while Cedric Coleman remained in the car. As Luttig got out of his car, Bobby heard him yell no, and then saw the flash of a muzzle of a pistol. Luttig was struck by the shot in the side of his head and fell to his knees. Beazley then ran over to the other side of the car and fired at Bobby, just missing her. Bobby fell to the garage floor and rolled under the car. She closed her eyes and pretended to be dead. Luttig was still alive, stunned and sitting next to the car. Beazley leaned over, raised his gun, and shot him again at point-blank range, killing John Luttig as his blood began to run down the driveway. Standing in his victim's blood, Beazley went through Luttig's pockets looking for the keys to the Mercedes-Benz. As he looked for the keys, Beazley asked Fig if the wife was dead. Fig said she was still moving, so Beazley told him to shoot her. Fig refused, so Beazley, after finding the keys, began to move to the other side of the car to, quote, shoot the bitch again. Fig changed his story and convinced Beazley that she was dead. Beazley jumped into the car and quickly backed out of the garage. In his haste to escape, he hit a retaining wall, damaging the car and causing a flat tyre. He was forced to abandon the car a few blocks away. Beazley ran back to his mother's car and rejoined the Coleman brothers. After Beazley threatened the Colemans not to say anything, the group headed back to Grapeland. Bobby Luttig, seeing her husband of 41 years bleeding from 2 gunshot wounds to his head, rushed to her neighbour's house. From there, she called 911, telling the dispatcher, quote, "My husband has been shot. Please hurry." John Luttig did not survive his wounds, passing away on the concrete floor of his garage at age 63 on April 19, 1994. The next day, local headlines read, "Carjackers killed Tyler Civic leader Luttig," and "Friends astounded by brutal act." In Grapeland, in the first period government class, Beazley was conspicuously absent, something that never happened. Later in the day, a friend ran into Beazley and was shocked by his appearance. Dark circles beneath his eyes and no expression on his face. 2 days later, Beazley told the friend the truth. He told the story of how he and the Colemans went to steal a car in Tyler, how he shot the husband and shot at the wife, how it happened so fast, and how it had all been a mistake. When the friend asked why he did it, Beazley had no answer, but he did say it would have been better if they had got in the car. The white friend couldn't imagine Beazley doing anything violent. It would be several years before the friend told his family and friends of what he knew. Since carjacking is a federal crime, it falls under the FBI's jurisdiction. And with the victim of the father being a federal judge, a massive FBI manhunt was soon underway. For Beazley, life was different for him. He ate and slept very little over the next 6 weeks. Instead, he ran and obsessively worked out lifting weights. To his parents, he seemed subdued. He went to church on his own. He quit teasing his little brother. His mother thought it was a sign of him maturing into adulthood as graduation got closer. 3 weeks after the murder, Beazley was representing Grapeland at the Texas High School state track meet at the University of Texas in Austin, finishing 4th in the 400-metre relay. 2 weeks later, Beazley graduated from high school with honours. He had 3 weeks of freedom before he had to report to the Marines in boot camp. For the first 6 weeks of the investigation, the FBI had very little to go on. Beazley and the Colemans weren't on the radar as suspects. That didn't stop the whispers in the quarters. Fig Coleman even told his girlfriend and stepfather the details of the murder. In early June 1994, an anonymous tip came into Crime Stoppers, and on June 6, the FBI quickly went down to Grapeland and interviewed the Colemans. After a lengthy interrogation, the Colemans were arrested. Shortly afterwards, late on the night of June 6, 1994, the FBI went to Beazley's grandmother's house and arrested him for capital murder. Ireland Beazley followed the police convoy back to Tyler, still trying to understand exactly what had happened. When the FBI showed him the Coleman's statements, he was stunned, but it was still his son. The next morning, Ireland consulted with a local attorney before Beazley's arraignment. The attorney politely declined the case, worried about a conflict of interest since he knew the Luttigs. The lawyer said he had to prepare Ireland. His son would be killed for this crime. At the arraignment, bail was set at $1 million. Emotions ran high that day in the courtroom. Ireland expected someone to get a rope and hang his son from the highest tree. Almost 1 year after the murder, Beazley's trial began in a state court in early 1995. He had been tried in federal court. He would not be facing the death penalty since he was under the age of 18 at the time of the crime. In state court, Texas law dictates that 17-year-olds that commit adult crimes deserve adult punishments. During the trial, Bobby Luttig told the jury, quote, "I was contemplating my own death, which I thought was imminent. I was wondering what the bullet would feel like as it went through my back. I was wondering what it would feel like to die." With overwhelming physical evidence and the testimony of Fig Coleman, the all-white jury found Beazley guilty of capital murder on March 13, 1995. Both the prosecution and defence had rejected potential black jurors during jury selection. During the punishment phase of the trial, the state had to prove that Beazley was likely to commit future acts of violence. To do this, prosecutors told of Beazley's past drug dealing and had the Colemans testify. The brothers made 3 damning claims against Beazley. He boasted of wanting to kill someone, he was remorseless, and he threatened to kill them if they talked. 2 psychologists then testified that Beazley was a future danger to society based on the testimony of the Colemans. On the last day of testimony, Judge Michael Luttig took the stand. The jury was visibly moved by the son's testimony as he searched for the words to describe the nightmare he and his family had lived over the past year. He testified that his father was a man of great integrity and principle, and how he was not only his hero, but his best friend too. He described picking out his father's clothes for his funeral and spending Christmas Day at the cemetery, sitting for hours before getting up to tell his dad, "Merry Christmas." He told the jury about how his mother trembled through the night and how she described the blood gushing from John's head as sounding like running water. 4 days after they found Beazley guilty of capital murder, it took the jury less than 2 hours to reach a decision. Judge Cynthia Stevens Kent then announced that the jury had sentenced Napolean Beazley to death. After receiving their life sentences, both Coleman brothers signed sworn affidavits that recanted their testimony against Beazley, claiming they lied as part of a deal to avoid the death penalty. Cedric Coleman said that the district attorney, quote, threatened me by telling me if I didn't testify the way he wanted, that he would make sure my brother got the death penalty. FBI investigators and even the Colemans' own lawyers, in response, signed affidavits denying any claims of a deal. In the state of Texas, there is an automatic appeal of any death sentence, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld this conviction in February 1997. Beazley's attorneys then appealed to the US District Court for the Eastern District of Texas in Dallas, but was again denied in 1999. The next appeal was to the US Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, but that court upheld the lower court's ruling in March 2001. Beazley's execution date was set for August 15, 2001. Some people were outraged that the state of Texas would execute someone who had committed a crime when they were a minor. Judge Kent wrote a letter to Texas Governor Rick Perry asking him to commute Beazley's sentence to life without parole. Grapeland resident and Houston County District Attorney Cindy Garner wrote to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles that, based on her knowledge of Beazley, as a person and her knowledge of the facts of the case, as a district attorney, she would have never asked for the death penalty. The 16 members of the Board of Pardon and Paroles, which could recommend to Governor Perry to commute the sentence to life in prison, voted 10-6 against any recommendations of clemency. Out of the previous 100 decisions in capital cases, it was the closest vote of the notoriously unsparing board. Governor Perry was asked to grant a 30-day reprieve, but he refused, stating, quote, "I am comfortable that my 17-year-old son knows the difference between right and wrong, and the law in the state of Texas says that a 17-year-old has to take responsibility for his actions. My duty is to uphold the law." In June 2001, just 2 months before his execution, Beazley's lawyers, David Botsford and Walter Long, applied for a stay of execution from the US Supreme Court on Beazley's behalf. They argued that executing people who were under the age of 18 at the time of their crime constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, violating both the US Constitution and international law. 3 members of the 9-member US Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas and David Souter, rescued themselves from the case due to personal ties with son Michael Luttig, leaving only 6 members to deliberate. The court deadlocked at an unusual 3-3 tie, resulting in a denial of the stay of execution on August 13, 2001, just 2 days before the scheduled execution. Boxford and Long filed last-minute appeals with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, raising issue with Beazley's age, racial bias of an all-white jury, and the truthfulness of the Coleman's testimony. Just hours before Beazley was to be executed, in an unusual move, the Court of Criminal Appeals voted 6-3 to stay his execution, not specifying what issues it would examine or when it would make its final decision on the execution. In April 2002, the Court of Criminal Appeals ruled against a defendant on another death penalty case dealing with attorney incompetence. After making this ruling, the court vacated Beazley's stay and allowed his execution to be rescheduled. Back in Judge Kent's district courtroom in Tyler on April 26, 2002, Beazley received his second date of execution. But before announcing the date, Judge Kent again gave her principled objection to executing youthful offenders, cautioning that she was not some weak-kneed judge, having set the execution date for 5 men previously. She made it clear that she had to follow the law and set a date, of which was to be May 28, 2002. After the date was set, Beazley rose to address the court, hoping that the absent Luttig family would one day hear him. He then said, quote, "8 years ago I involved myself in a crime I instantly regretted. I knew it was wrong. I know it is wrong now. I've been trying to make up for it ever since that moment. I've apologised ever since that moment, not just through words, but through my acts. I violated the law. I violated this city. And I have violated a family, all to satisfy my own misguided emotions." Weeping and with his voice cracking, he said his next words with increased feeling, quote, "I'm sorry. I wish I had a second chance to make up for it, but I don't." Over the next month, the case drew worldwide attention due to Beazley's age. Pleas for clemency came from the NAACP, the European Union, Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, and clergy from around the world, the American Bar Association, 18 Texas state representatives, Judge Kent, D.A. Garner, and George Pearson, a Grapeland City councilman who formerly the warden at death row in Texas, all urged Governor Perry to grant clemency. Amnesty International USA said the execution violated international law and that the United States was now among only 5 countries, including Congo, Nigeria, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, to execute such youthful offenders. Petitions came in from around the world with thousands of signatures to stop the execution. But not everyone protested Beazley's execution. A Houston-based activist group called Justice for All condemned the protests, saying just because Beazley couldn't buy a pack of Cools doesn't mean he shouldn't be held accountable for cold-blooded murder. Another writer for the group told the citizens of Europe to quit whining about America's death penalty laws. CNN aired an hour-long documentary they filmed with Christine Amanpour reporting about the case. On May 28th, his second date of execution, Beazley was down to his final 3 hopes of clemency. In the late morning, the Texas Board of Pardons voted 10-7 against recommending clemency to Governor Perry, thus ending any hope that the governor would commute his sentence to life in prison. Strike 1. By the afternoon, the US Supreme Court rejected his final appeal. Strike 2. It was now up to Governor Perry, who could only grant a 30-day stay of execution. Perry refused, telling reporters that, quote, "To delay his punishment is to delay justice." Strike 3. About 4:30 p.m, Suzanne Luttig, John Luttig's daughter, walked past reporters into the prison. The press contingent fell silent as a show of respect for the Luttig family. At 6:02 p.m, 5 guards came for Beazley and led him to the execution chamber. The tie-down team bounded him with thick leather straps. The IV team inserted catheters in both arms. The warden asked if Beazley had any final words, and after staring at Suzanne Luttig for a moment, he said no, and closed his eyes. The warden nodded his head, and the lethal cocktail was released into his veins at 6:08 p.m. Several minutes later, a doctor would declare Beazley dead at 6:17 p.m, Tuesday, May the 28th, 2002. Beazley, through his lawyers, released a final statement. It read, in part, quote, "The act I committed to put me here was not just heinous, it was senseless. But the person that committed that act is no longer here. I am. I'm not going to struggle physically against any restraints. I'm sorry that I'm here. I'm sorry that you're all here. I'm sorry that John Luttig died. And I'm sorry that it was something in me that caused all this to happen. No one wins tonight." 3 days later, Beazley's younger brother Jamal graduated from Grapeland High School. The next day, the family buried Beazley. Jamal Beazley would also graduate from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, the same town that his brother was executed in. Ireland and Rena Beazley, now in their 60s, still live in Grapeland. Despite his family's devastating loss, Judge Michael Luttig would continue his upward rise through the judicial ranks, culminating with a 2005 interview with President George W. Bush for a seat in the US Supreme Court when Justice Sandra Day O'Connor retired. Current Justice Samuel Alito was eventually selected by Bush for the seat. The next year, after a disagreement with the Bush administration over the transfer of enemy combatant Jose Padilla, Luttig left the bench and became a legal counsel and senior vice president for the Boeing Corporation. Luttig held this position until May 2019, when Boeing named him to the newly created position of counselor and senior advisor to the Boeing chairman, president and CEO. He will manage all legal matters associated with the Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 accidents and other special matters. Bobby Luttig would pass away on April 1st, 2003 at the age of 69. On March 1st, 2005, less than 3 years after Napoleon Beazley was executed. The US Supreme Court banned the practice of executing offenders who were under the age of 18 when they committed their crimes. That wraps things up for this week's show, guys. Episode 19 is now in the books, but the discussion doesn't have to stop there, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things people want to have an opinion on about it. Head on over to our Facebook page at True Crime Grapple and request to join, where you can have your say on this episode. Like I say, there's a lot of important things to discuss. If you want my thoughts on the case, then there's one place to go. That's patreon.com/truecrimegrapple and sign up for the murder tier to get the bonus shows. All that info is in the show notes. Thanks again for your support, your company, and the privilege of your listenership. And until next time, I've been your host, Dan. Stay safe out there.